Welcome, everybody. My name is Stephanie Valencia. I'm a Deputy Director of the White House Office of Public Engagement. Welcome to the White House. I have the very distinct pleasure to introduce to you the new, as of last week, representative in the Office of Public Engagement for People with Disabilities, Claudia Gordon.
Good morning, everyone. What a great crowd. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. I would like to thank Stephanie for the recent introduction and welcome everyone here today to the White House. We're here to celebrate the 23rd anniversary of the ADA. I would also like to say people who are watching, say hello to people who are watching this live stream online. So hello to everyone. So as you may have heard from Stephanie, last week I began my detail here at the White House. I come from the Department of Labor, and I can see my former boss sitting in the back, Pat Shue. Hello. So I came from the Office of Contract and Compliance Program, the Federal Contract Compliance Program, and we have a list of issues, and one of the top issues are people with disabilities, employment for people with disabilities.
You know, I have to say, these past 2 weeks, I really couldn't have been more pleased just to join this team. It's a really amazing, hardworking team here. The Office of Public Engagement, yeah. I'm honored and humbled to be part of the team, just to be given this opportunity. And also just to serve in the capacity of representing the voice for people with disabilities all over America here in the White House. I mean, that's what OPE is all about, making sure that you're all your voices have been heard and is heard and responded to. I will be working very, very hard just to make sure that you all and your organizations are well represented here during my time. In fact, earlier this morning, we had the privilege to actually have a roundtable discussion with Valerie Jarrett, the senior advisor to the president, and the newly appointed and confirmed Secretary of the Department of Labor, Tom Perez, who's here. And also, the president joined us for the roundtable, and we had a discussion with disability leaders from the various parts of the community and really represented the whole spectrum of the community, and we discussed about important policy issues and concerns that really impact our community. And I see some of the people who are just in the panel discussion here in the audience, and I can tell you it was a really wonderful discussion. So, you know, I think the time is really perfect. I mean, tomorrow is the 23rd anniversary of the ADA, and I think we're really off to a great start. I really look forward to what we're going to accomplish together going forward. The president, he's committed to helping our community advance really many of the issues that impact the disability community in general. And as you all know, there's a lot of issues that are really, really challenging. So we here at OPE, the Domestic Policy Council, I mean, the White House can't do this alone. Tom is taking his new role at the Department of Labor. We can't do this alone. We need everybody working together in a close partnership to continue to really advance towards progress and realize the goals and the promise of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So now I also need to mention, I'm really really so excited. My favorite part of today's program is going to be listening from these 8 diverse young leaders who are doing such extraordinary work within their communities. And they're really working to get us closer to that promise of the ADA. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists today. And now, I'm very honored to have the opportunity to introduce someone who, you know, through the years and through his career has been fighting for disability issues. And from his days as a young lawyer in Maryland to his years as Montgomery County's counsel, actually, and actually during his time at the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division. So, please join me in welcoming the newly confirmed Secretary of the Department of Labor, Mr. Tom Perez.
Good morning. It's great to see all of you here, and it's an honor to be here to mark the 23rd anniversary of the ADA. I'm a little bit, disappointed in Claudia. Apparently the Department of Labor wasn't big enough for the two of us. So I came 3 days ago, and Claudia left 6 days ago. So I don't know what's going on here, but what I do know is the White House knows talent when they see it. And that's why Claudia is here. She's part of the bigger family, and she's going to do a great job here working with a wonderful team in the Office of Public Engagement at the DPC throughout the White House, led by the President himself. So, Claudia, congratulations. It's remarkable to look around this audience. I see current colleagues. I see, as of 3 days ago, former colleagues. And I see so many people from the community, because the Americans with Disabilities Act is part of a movement. It's a movement that's been led by all of you in this room. And some of you who I know are here in spirit. I'm certain that Paul Miller is sitting in this room. You know that. I am certain that Justin Dart is sitting in this room. And you know that. And I am so appreciative that the other day I got to see Ginny Thornburg, and I spoke recently with Dick Thornburg. The Americans with Disabilities Act has always been a bipartisan mission, a bipartisan history, and it will continue to be that way, thanks to the leadership of people like Dick Thornburg, Ginny Thornburg, Ted Kennedy, and so many others. And we have so much to be proud of, because it really is one of our nation's proudest triumphs. And it's an honor for me here to be saying good morning to you on behalf of the President. We had a great meeting this morning. Claudia is absolutely right. And as usual, the President was totally on point. He understands the challenges confronting people with disabilities. He's very proud, and anniversaries are a time for reflection. We have come a long way in expanding opportunity, and we're very proud of the work under the President's leadership that has been done. But at the same time, the President will be the first to tell you that it is not the time to rest on our laurels. It's the time to remember, as Senator Kennedy often said, that civil rights remains the unfinished business of America. And as Valerie Jarrett explained this morning, and Valerie and Cecilia Munoz, who will join you shortly and join us shortly, they have been champions for that unfinished business here at the White House. And they will continue to be champions. And they have partners across the agencies. Because there's one thing I learned, and I learned it a long time ago. If we're going to solve our most vexing problems, the sustainable resolution of those problems requires unprecedented levels of interagency collaboration. If we're going to truly empower people with disabilities, we've got to recognize the seamless web that is our federal agencies. If we're going to ensure that there's employment opportunities, people like Kathy Martinez and others, Pat Shue, remarkably dedicated professionals at the Department of Labor, We have to make sure that as we work and expand employment opportunities, that we understand the implications for people in the Medicaid context, so that you don't have to make the choice between keeping your health insurance and keeping and getting a job. We have to understand that housing is a key part, and I applaud Secretary Donovan for his recent release of the Olmstead Guidance, a very important template for how we can ensure that the Department of Housing and Urban Development plays a critical role in expanding opportunity for people with disabilities. We also are working very closely, and I applaud the leadership of Secretary Sebelius. There are a number of regulations relating to home and community-based services because there's a recognition that we need to continue our efforts to ensure that home and community-based services are the rule and institutionalization is the exception, rather than the current reality. And we have a Secretary of Transportation who is acutely aware that if we don't have transportation opportunities that enable people with disabilities to get to the workplace, then all of this other work is for naught. And so we have that seamless web. And this was the tone the President and Valerie Jarrett and others set from the outset of this administration. And I had the privilege of actually working in this administration on a volunteer basis during the transition. I saw that tone on the disability rights context during that transition, and we see it reflected in what the President has done, whether it's the year of community living, whether it's the work that has been done in agencies across the country, whether it is the collaborations with others. And I want to applaud Governor Markell from the state of Delaware. Let's give it up for Governor Markell for making the employment of people with disabilities such a priority during his tenure as the head of NGA. We have seen so many employers who've stepped to the plate to serve as model employers and to demonstrate that they have the ability to see ability in people and not simply reflect on disability. And there are so many model employers out there that we want to thank, and we will continue to do so, because the ADA truly is one of our greatest triumphs. I remember Senator Kennedy, he called it a Bill of Rights, and he was right. It made us more inclusive, it made us more humane, and I watched firsthand at the Department of Health and Human Services, then later at the Department of Justice, and now at the Department of Labor, how we have been able to use the ADA to break down physical barriers, but equally, if not more importantly, to break down attitudinal barriers. That has been one of the keys to our success. It really has revolutionized ways that people think about people with disabilities. It's wonderful. One of my favorite things to do. I went for a walk along our path this morning at about 6 o'clock. And it's wonderful to walk through a park and to see the work that's being done to make that park accessible for people with disabilities. That's some of the unfinished business that you told us about when we were thinking about amendments in 2010 to mark the 20th anniversary of the ADA. Another example of how we have come a long way through this movement, thanks to the leadership of all of you. And we are opening those doors, and we're breaking down barriers, and we're getting a lot done. But we know that there's a lot more to be done in this area, and I have heard from you. And one thing I know, as I have the privilege of being really good friends with people like Bob Williams and others. Bob's in the back here. Bob, if you look in the dictionary under the word serial activist, you will see Bob Williams' mug. That would be Bob. I was sitting with Bob in 1999 at the Department of Health and Human Services the day the Olmstead decision came down. And we were sitting with Secretary Shalala talking about how Olmstead would hopefully be the Brown versus Board of the disability rights movement. And regrettably, there has been a similarity between Olmstead and Brown versus Board because progress has, at times, moved along with all deliberate speed. In other words, not nearly fast enough. But we have seen progress. You look at the data from HHS on home and community-based services, and you see it's moving in the right direction. Cindy Mann, who heads the Center for Medicaid and State Operations, she's second to none. She gets this stuff. If you don't know her, get to know her, because she knows her stuff. A great leader. Secretary Sebelius, as a former governor, gets this stuff. And we've been able to do so much work under her leadership to move forward. But Bob and so many others continue to remind us that we do have unfinished business. We have unfinished business in the employment context. And we've heard loudly and clearly from people in this audience about the work that needs to be done in the employment context. We've done a lot already, and I applaud the work that my colleagues Pat Shue and Kathy Martinez have been doing at the Department of Labor. They've been so active and so involved, and they are good listeners. And they recognize, like I do, that the ideas that bring about change are ideas that come from the grassroots. And that is why they have done so much outreach. That's why the Disability Employment Initiative, investing $63 million to increase the workforce system's capacity to provide job training for people with disabilities. It's about expanding opportunity. Because if I had to give you a one-sentence description of the Department of Labor, the Department of Labor is the Department of Opportunity. That's what we do. We expand opportunity for everyone. And as we mark the ADA anniversary, we are again redoubling our efforts to ensure that every person with a disability has that opportunity to have the dignity of work. I've never met more people in my life than people with disabilities who come up to me and say, I want to be a taxpayer. How many people come up and say, I want to be a taxpayer? But all too frequently, the deck is stacked. If I'm going to take a job, I've got to give up my health insurance, or I've got to give up other supports. And so it becomes Pyrrhic. And as a result, we see the unconscionably high unemployment rates of people with disabilities. And that is why the various agencies in the federal government are working together, I think, more seamlessly than ever, more coordinated than ever, working with our partners in the private sector, working with advocates like all of you in this audience, working with academics, working with the business community, working with all the stakeholders to ensure that we indeed expand opportunity. You know, the Labor Department, and a lot of people don't know this, we're an enforcement agency as well. And one of the things I'm most proud of is a collaboration we did recently, and I see Rebecca Bond up there, the new head of the Disability Rights Section. Rebecca, could you stand up from the Department of Justice? Rebecca is a fantastic civil rights lawyer, if I say so myself, and I will. And the Department of Justice and the Department of Labor recently worked together, cracking down on a disability services provider in Rhode Island, revoking all the special minimum wage certifications for numerous legal violations, because we met the victims. And I use the word victim very consciously in that case. The investigation found that the company was not paying employees for all hours worked, nor had they determined the appropriate wage for each hour as the law required. And so the Labor Department, working with the Civil Rights Division, we were able to negotiate a first-of-its-kind agreement with the City of Providence and the State of Rhode Island to ensure that people receiving employment and support services could do so in an integrated community setting rather than in segregated programs. Remember, you know, Olmsted is not just about where you live, it's how you live. And that is a key. And that's why employment is all about how you live and how you can realize your highest and best dreams. Housing is all about where you live and how you can realize your highest and best dreams. And that is what we continue to do in the Olmsted decision. And so I mentioned that not only are we doing work in partnership with Department of Labor and Department of Justice, but you saw recently the Department of Housing and Urban Development issuing new guidance encouraging public housing agencies and other HUD-assisted housing providers to work with state and local governments to increase integrated housing opportunities for people with disabilities. That was a very important statement, and I met personally a number of times with Secretary Donovan. His commitment to this is second to none. And he looks forward to working with people in this room to make sure that that guidance isn't just gathering dust, but that guidance becomes an impetus for further reform and further progress. And that's where we need your help. Because I'm 3 days on this job. I was in a meeting Monday. I had the privilege of being in a meeting with the president, and somebody in the room said, well, Mr. President, you know, this is my 7th day on the job, so my insights may be limited. To which I said, well, you've been here 7 times longer than I have, sir. But I'll tell you, this may be a new job, but the values that I bring to this job are identical to the values that I brought to other jobs, whether it was the Department of Justice, the Department of Health and Human Services, and they're the values that you bring into this room. The values of inclusion, the values of expanding opportunity, the values of ensuring full integration. Because I want everybody to be able to realize their highest and best dreams. I want to make sure that we continue to strive for excellence in the employment of people with disabilities. I want to make sure that we strive for excellence. We've made so much progress on the Olmsted front as an administration, but we know that there are still all too many kids. Look at Florida. There are all too many adults. Look virtually everywhere that want to live in community settings but still cannot due to unnecessary barriers that we will work collaboratively to break down. I'm particularly excited as I begin my new job, as I mentioned before, to be working with Kathy Martinez in the Office of Disability Employment Policy, because I saw it from afar, and now I get to see it up close and personal. And we're working hard to make sure, through, for instance, the provision of technical assistance to 33 states, helping them to promote integrated employment as the first choice for job seekers. So as we do these individual cases with Rhode Island, we have another entity in the federal government working with other states to make sure, hey, this is this agreement. Do you want to be Rhode Island and be sued? Or do you want to be at the forefront of reform? That's kind of the choice. And I think through those carrots and sticks, I think we can move forward. And I'll tell you, as we move forward and talk to states and talk to employers, we're finding that there is a remarkable receptivity. And so I approach this enterprise with great optimism. My colleague, Pat Hsu, is doing remarkable work and has been a champion at OFCCP for people with disabilities, because she, like I, believes that people with disabilities want to work and are able to work. They want to be independent. They are independent and want to be self-sufficient. They want to pay taxes. They want to be part of the economic mainstream. They want the feeling of pride and purpose that comes with waking up every morning, performing a job, having the dignity of work, and earning a paycheck at the end of the week. That's what it's about. So I am thrilled that we've made progress, but I am ever mindful that we have a lot of unfinished business. And we're going to hear from remarkable champions of change today, because they have done so much to inspire all of us. And I am so inspired when I meet them and learn their stories, and I'm looking forward to having you meet them and learn their stories. But before we go to them, Claudia is going to come up and introduce a couple more special guests that are here, hopefully, to say hello to you today. Thank you so much, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you. What a great secretary we have in place. I'm looking forward to everything that is to come under his leadership. We have an amazing champion in him. I mean, don't you agree? Absolutely. I mean, we couldn't ask for a better representative. I'm thrilled. I know you're thrilled. And at this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Miss Valerie Jarrett. The senior advisor to our president. Also, she's the chair of the White House Council on Women. You know, I heard just recently this morning something that I'd like to repeat because I believe it's true. Someone said earlier today that Valerie is the energy, the engine. She is the engine behind this movement that carries us forward during the Obama administration, and we are certainly proud of her.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the White House. We are just delighted to have you all here the day before we celebrate the 23rd anniversary of ADA. Give yourselves a round of applause. I want to thank Claudia for that very generous introduction, and of course to Secretary Perez. And I know that in the midst of his confirmation process, the disability community was behind him 100%. And the reason why you were is that you knew he has always been and will continue to be behind you 100%. So another round of applause for Tom. So I am so excited to have Claudia on board. When she came in for her interview, within about 30 seconds, I was exhausted from her energy. She just had 1,000 ideas, and she has hit the ground running. She's pulled together this event in less than 2 weeks since she's been on the job. I took her in to say hello to the president earlier this morning, and it was going to be about a 30-second hello. And she managed in about 2 minutes to get out every single thing we want to get done together. And so he said, you know what? I think I'm in good hands with you. So another round of applause for Claudia as well. So on that note, and on behalf of the president, I really want to thank each and every one of you who are here today for everything that you do for the disability community. You are here, you were invited here because you're all rock stars and you're supporting rock stars who are our champions of change. One of the things that I enjoy most about my job is having this opportunity to engage with the American people. And one of the things I like most about my top favorite things is Champions of Change, because it gives us an opportunity to recognize those who have truly made a difference and put a shining star on them for their hard work. And what we have found over the course of, well, a lifetime is that you see just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And if we can, through the White House, lift those up, you serve as role models, you serve as beacons of hope. When you go back to your communities, I hope that you brag about having been here. I hope that you brag about being recognized as a champion of change. It means a great deal to us to have the privilege of recognizing you, because we are who we are because of your efforts. And so a round of applause to all of our champions of change who are here today. Now, today's champions are all incredibly effective advocates for the disability community. And it's amazing, especially given their ages. And so since I'm old enough to be most of your parents, the fact that you've accomplished so much at such a young age is tremendous. From advocating for youths with disabilities to working on policy affecting the deaf and hard of hearing, from wheelchair racing and helping people discover their full potential to empowering students of color with disabilities. These everyday heroes are an inspiration for so many, including, of course, myself. Our champions embody the spirit of the ADA, and many of them have never even known a world without it since they were younger than since they were born after the ADA was passed. But despite growing up in a country with a law that does so much, they still understand the need for continued hard work and action. When President Obama talks about affecting change, these are exactly the type of young leaders that he's thinking about. He's also doing all he can to make our country more equal for everyone. And we know that disability issues do not just affect those with disabilities, but they affect America and all Americans. That's why the president is committed to honoring the legacy of the ADA, and he has expanded educational and employment opportunities for people who are living with disabilities, increased access to health care, and protected the civil rights of those with disabilities under Tom's watch when he was in the Justice Department, and access to community living. In fact, I heard from the Office of Personnel Management that last year, we had the highest percentage of people with disabilities in the federal government in over 30 years, which is amazing. A pledge that the president made before he was elected president. On the education front, the Department of Education issued a document on restraint and seclusion, and as a result, multiple states have adopted principles to make their schools safer and treat their students with greater dignity. And last year, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, issued the first ever National Deaf-Blind Equipment Program to help meet the needs of deaf and blind individuals, helping them to stay connected to their friends, their family, their colleagues, while living independently. These are just a few of the examples of the progress that we have made together. And while the legacy of the ADA is stronger than ever, and we all know that much work remains. We must keep educating the public, not only for the legacy of the ADA, but on the evolving challenges that the disability community faces. For example, right now, the Obama administration has signed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But as you all know, last December, the Senate was unable to ratify it, despite the strong and impressive effort by many of you in this room. That is a travesty. It's a travesty. And a few of us had a chance to meet with the president earlier, and I could see his blood pressure raising when he mentioned it, because it's just not right. I spoke with Secretary Kerry about this a couple of days ago, and he is adamantly going to continue to advocate, as we all are, to make sure that the Senate not only ratifies the treaty because it's good policy, but because it is the right thing to do. And there is no good reason not to, right? When the ADA was signed 23 years ago, President George H.W. Bush, Senator Tom Harkin, and Senate Minority Leader Bob Dole, whose birthday was just this week, exercised true visionary leadership. Bipartisan reform was and still is possible, and it benefits all Americans. That's what we are hearing when we travel around the country. They want to know why the elected representatives can't focus on what's important, and that is the American people. So we hope that we can come together on this issue and get the treaty passed. As the president said when he recognized the 20th anniversary of the ADA, he said, and I quote, "Equal access, equal opportunity. The freedom to make our lives what we will. These aren't principles that belong to any one group or any one political party. They are common principles. They are American principles." I think those words still ring true today. I know that that is the same mission that we all share, and so we have to keep up the good work. So I want to add my voice to the many others who are congratulating our champions of change today. And I want to thank everybody who decided to come here, spend a day with us, recognize those champions, celebrate everything that we have done, and just encourage us to continue, as the president likes to say, to reach for that more perfect union. Thank you very much, everybody.
Wow, so now I'd like to turn it over to another really important individual here, especially in regards to our community. Cecilia Munoz, she's the Director of Domestic Policy and Council, and that office actually is really key for moving along a lot of policy issues. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Cecilia.
Thank you, Claudia. And happy ADA anniversary, everybody. I'm super proud and excited and especially inspired to be here with all of you, and especially to be in the presence of our champions of change. While it is a wonderful thing to be honoring you and to be lifting up the work that you do and everything that you do and everything that you represent, I will make a small confession, which is that we get so inspired by doing these events. You have no idea how much inspiration it gives to the White House staff to have you here, to have the chance to learn about what you do, and to be inspired by your example. So really, thank you for that, especially because this is kind of what gives us the energy to do what we do. So you have already heard from this new Secretary of Labor and from Valerie Jarrett. I have to say, Claudia, we will have to discuss later what it means that I had to follow those two as speakers. You've definitely put me in the hot seat. So, everything I was going to say about the federal government's commitment to making sure that we lead the way in hiring people with disabilities, Valerie has already said. And everything about what the Justice Department has been doing to make sure that we enforce the ADA and that we enforce our civil rights laws and that we open the door of opportunity to every American, because we have not one bit of talent to go to waste in this country. You've already heard about from the new Secretary of Labor, since this was his job at the Department of Justice. But can I just say, how glad are we that Tom Perez is the Secretary of Labor? You know better than anybody what a champion he is for this community and constituency, and as you just heard, that comes straight from here. And it is an honor to serve alongside people like Tom and people like Valerie, and to mark what is an important occasion. I am old enough to have been in Washington working on civil rights issues when the ADA was passed. And I had the honor of sitting at the civil rights table with people like Justin Dart, who gave so much to make sure that this dream became a reality, and he contributed so much to, as the president likes to say, make us a more perfect union, to make sure that we are actually living up to our ideals, that we have laws which reflect our best values, our commitment to opportunity for all, and our commitment to making sure that everyone can contribute. It was an honor to watch that happen, and it's an amazing thing to watch how much progress we've made in the last 23 years. But it is also a daunting thing to stand up and recognize how much work there still is to do, almost a quarter of a century in from the passing of the ADA. It's important that government set an example, and we are doing our best to do that. But it's also important to celebrate milestones, because you all have worked pretty hard to achieve those milestones, and I hope you know what a strong partner you have in the president and in all of us who work for him. So rather than continue to recount the things you've heard from Valerie and from Tom, I want to spend a minute talking about one of the president's accomplishments, which does not get sort of discussed or thought of in the context of people with disabilities, but which I think is pretty important, and that's the Affordable Care Act, right? It has a relationship to the ADA. It offers tremendous benefits to people with disabilities, and it's a really long list, so I'm just going to go through some highlights, right? So first of all, right, it expands access to affordable health care coverage for millions of people, ends discrimination on the basis of pre-existing conditions, and ends lifetime limits on coverage. All by itself, that would be a big deal, right? But it has also significantly advanced our work to support home and community-based services through a range of new and expanded programs. So, for example, it extended the Money Follows the Person program, through which thousands of people have transitioned out of institutions and returned to their communities. It created the Balancing Incentive program, which provides additional funds to states to increase access to long-term services and supports. And it establishes new financial incentives for states to support community living through the Community First Choice option. We know that people often prefer to receive services in their own homes and communities whenever possible, and the ACA has given us new and enhanced tools to help make that possible. HHS has also continues to support the disability community in a variety of capacities. Last April, Secretary Sebelius established the Administration for Community Living, or ACL, to provide national leadership. You can definitely applaud for that. To provide national leadership and direction to maximize the independence, well-being, and health of older adults, people with disabilities of all ages, and their families and caregivers. And it accomplishes this by advancing policies, services, supports that enable people to live with dignity, make their own choices, and participate fully in society. That's part of what makes us a more perfect union. We're proud of the progress we've made, but we know we have a lot more work to do. And I hope you're hearing today just how ready we are to take on that fight. This is work that we have to do together. It is work that this administration is deeply committed to, but we also have no illusions about being able to get where we need to go by ourselves. Disability policy should be something that every part of the government thinks about and integrates into its work. Everything we work on, from providing information to delivering health services to investing in technology or businesses to providing a high-quality education, every bit of that needs to be taking disability into account. We need to be deliberate about making sure that our work affects all Americans. All of these things need to work together. And in order to get there, we rely on you. You are our eyes and ears and hands. You are the people who hold our feet to the fire, and not only is it okay to do that, we count on you to do that, because that's how we know if we're getting the job right. So it's important to celebrate that 23 years ago the ADA became law. It's important to celebrate how far we've come, but it is especially important to rededicate ourselves to the work that lies ahead. So you know you have that commitment from the President. You know you have that commitment from his team. We know we have that commitment from you, and we are really very grateful. So thank you for the inspiration of your work. Thank you for the work that has brought us to this moment that we have, this important milestone to celebrate. But I thank you especially for the work that lies ahead. We have a lot to do, and I look forward to doing that alongside all of you. Thank you all so much.
Wow. So hopefully, well, hello. So hopefully these remarks really demonstrate to everybody in the room the commitment and the work that we've accomplished so far on behalf of the disability community at large. Obviously, there's a lot more that remains to be done. It's really very fitting that we're going to take the rest of this time, this morning actually, just to focus and really just put the spotlight on these champions of change. And I have to briefly say, for me, it was really an easy decision to decide to use this opportunity to honor and recognize these young leaders. Because as a young leader myself in the past, my mentor, one of many actually, one of my most honored and champions is Justin Dart. And he really knew the potential knows potential when he sees it. It doesn't matter, young or old. He recognizes potential, and he saw that in me. And, typically young leaders tend to be in the background. The older leaders tend to kind of lead the way, and they're the ones that people see, and that you don't really see the people in the background. But Justin Dart wasn't like that. He put me all the way in the front. So today, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, well, really, we have such great youth leaders here, and I'm a disability liaison in my office, and we have a tremendous amount of liaisons. So before we start, I want to just turn it over for a few remarks from Ronnie Cho, and he's my colleague in the Office of Public Engagement, and he's the Youth Alliance liaison.
Well, hello, everyone. It's a pretty good-looking group here, I would say. I've seen a lot of groups, so I'm not just saying that. My name is Ronnie Cho. I work here at the Office of Public Engagement, and I serve the President as his liaison to young people. Now, we generally define that as folks under the age of 35, so I hope no feelings are hurt that you're not my... It was actually 30 until I turned 30, so I moved it up to 35. So. It's a second term, so, but I am delighted to be here to join you and to celebrate, a milestone in an important piece of legislation that is very much true to the spirit of what this country is about: opportunity, about access, equality. And in particular, I'd like to sort of talk about why I am so bullish about this generation, and why the President certainly is too, that this is a generation that is the most inclusive one in history, and believes that this country is stronger, we are better, when we are all have access to the same kinds of opportunities. This is not just a generation that is inheriting a lot of the challenges laid before us, but is meeting the challenges and is creating opportunities. And whether it's the disability community, whether it's children of immigrants who are trying to get an education, folks who are fighting for marriage equality, folks who are fighting for protecting women's health, and on down the line. This is a generation that believes that we should all play by the same rules and get a fair shake and a fair shot. And it fills me up with a tremendous amount of pride to be a representative to the President of a generation who truly believes that we have a lot of work to do in enabling these opportunities and expanding opportunity and access. We stand on the shoulders of giants, but I think this is the generation that will really make good on the promise that we sent out to the world, that you could come to this country and anything is possible. Anything that you want to achieve is possible. And this is a generation that will enable those things. And so momentarily we're going to honor some young people who really define and are exemplary individuals themselves who are doing just that and are indicative of not just a few folks of this generation and young leaders who are making big impacts in communities in communities all over the country, but really I think demonstrate a value that young people have in this country and demonstrate a pervasive ideal that access, equality, and opportunity should be afforded to everybody. So with that, I'd like to hand it over. I want to say thank you very much for joining us today. It's an amazing opportunity to have you guys here. I want to introduce very quickly here. Am I introducing Rebecca? I guess I will. My friend and colleague, Rebecca, we used to work in the White House together, actually. I haven't seen you in quite a bit. So this is a moment of personal privilege. I want to say hello. White House Champions of Change is a program that we stood up about just over 2 years ago. And it's very much in the spirit of highlighting ordinary Americans who are doing extraordinary things. And in a time when there's so much attention to kind of the stuff that's happening in Washington, D.C., and other places that we don't have to look very far to see the real leaders and the champions in our communities who are really making a difference and delivering for the American people. And so this program, we've searched across the country in a number of different areas to find those very champions of change. And in this particular panel, I'm excited to present a panel discussion moderated by Rebecca Coakley, the Executive Director of the National Council on Disability, who will spotlight some of these brilliant examples of, again, ordinary folks who are doing extraordinary things to build and strengthen this country very much. So thank you very much for your time. And Rebecca Coakley, come on up.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the White House. Welcome back for some of you that have been here before. I have to thank Claudia. The idea for this event was something that she jumped in, with both feet. And we went, we've been going to town on this for the last several weeks, and it's come through several different iterations. And I think one of the things that was most important was this panel, and this panel never changed. This panel was always about figuring out how we empower the next generation of Americans with disabilities and give them a chance to come and speak. The hardest part was picking the champions, and I am honored to be sitting up here with all of you guys. You guys are amazing. You heard it yourselves from the conversations that you had with Secretary Perez, and from Valerie and from Cecilia. You guys are here because you deserve to be here, because you're doing amazing work. And so let's start off first by having each of you give yourselves a brief introduction, say who you are, say where you're from, and what you're working on.
All right. My name is Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt, and I wear multiple hats. I am a Paralympic medalist in the sport of wheelchair racing, an international adoptee, a researcher, an athlete, and of course, a champion of change. My motto in life is dream, drive, do. It really embodies my positive outlook and my overarching mission to help others recognize their full potential regardless of their differences. I grew up in Natick, Massachusetts, and currently live in Champaign, Illinois. And there's two major strands with my mission, and the first one is equal access to education. This was something that I had to fight for, and it fueled my drive. And it shapes much of my work to help those individuals who are left on the sidelines and who doubt their own academic abilities. It also shapes my research agenda to tell the stories of success, but also the stories that we don't often hear about, and those who are just kind of left on the sides and we don't know about what it is that makes them succeed or not succeed. Secondly, my involvement in sport as a person with disability taught me to be independent, taught me to be confident, and gave me a platform to do good in the world. I strive to promote access to sport, and whether that's competitive or recreational opportunities for persons with disabilities, with the help from U.S. Paralympics and Disabled Sports USA, along with many other local chapters. Sport, regardless of medals won or records earned, contributes to a positive psychosocial well-being, and it is definitely one of my strong causes. It all takes a dream, a drive to make it happen, and ultimately to go out there and do what you set out for. So thank you for having me here today.
Hi, I'm Zoe Gross. I am currently the Patricia Morrissey Disability Policy Fellow at the Institute for Educational Leadership. I've done a lot of work with Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. I consider it sort of my home organization in disability activism. I'm a senior at Vassar College. I'm from Oakland, California. What are the other relevant stats I'm supposed to give here? My project that I've been working on in the last couple years is called Day of Mourning, and it's an annual national event that focuses on commemorating the lives of people with disabilities who've been killed by their family members or caregivers. And I think that just as the feminist movement has spoken out against violence against women, it's important for our movement to speak out against the violence that people with disabilities face, especially since it's so often excused or explained away or described as understandable or even merciful to commit a violent act against someone if they're disabled. So what Day of Mourning is about is remembering people as they deserve to be remembered, and remembering that it's not our lives that are tragic, it's our deaths, and it's when we face discrimination and violence.
Hello, my name is Desiree Moore. I'm from Long Island, New York, and I am from Youth Power, which is a New York statewide network of young people who have experience in disabilities and cross systems, and I am the Long Island Regional Youth Partner. So I have the honor to be able to increase youth voice and youth involvement throughout Long Island.
Hello, my name is Andrew Phillips. I'm with the Policy Council for the National Association for the Deaf. I'm from Berkeley, California, and now I'm working on many different policies and issues that affect the deaf and hard of hearing and their civil rights. I'm going to Congress often to advocate for the rights of deaf and hard of hearing people. Also, I work on a lot of rule makings in different federal agencies like the FCC, DOJ, and several others. My goal is to see more equal access for deaf and hard of hearing people wherever they are.
Hi, good afternoon. This is truly an honor to be here, and thank you to the White House and the National Council on Disability and other stakeholders for putting this event together today. And also to all my peers here. You guys are, I think, doing all awesome work in your communities. My name is Zach Garafalo, and I was born and raised in Massachusetts, went to Southern Vermont College, and now I'm living and working in Albany for Youth Power. Youth Power is a cross-systems disability advocacy organization that brings the voices of young people to New York State officials. We do a lot of work to ensure that all people have a voice and choice in their service planning and treatment delivery. Initially, with Youth Power, I built the Ready to Achieve mentoring program with the support of many people. But RAMP is a high-tech, career-focused mentoring program for young people who are at risk of entering the juvenile justice system. More importantly, though, it connects these young people to careers so that they can transition into either continued learning opportunities, into the workforce, and ultimately become productive members of society. It's pretty cool. We pick young adult and young professional and college-aged mentors who these mentees can look at and say, I can be you someday. I don't need to necessarily be on this same path. So that's what I'm doing now. So thank you very much.
It is our duty to fight. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Every time I think of that quote, it really hits home, and it's always stuck with me because I think it represents what we are as humans and what we are as advocates, and that is we are always striving to be our most free selves. And that quote informs all of my disability advocacy in that, one, I'm looking at intersectional approaches to coalition building. Two, the school-to-prison pipeline and students of color with disabilities. We know that only 1/3 of students diagnosed with emotional disturbance will graduate high school. We also know that 50% of students in juvenile incarceration facilities are diagnosed with emotional disturbance. And the third thing is deinstitutionalization and international disability advocacy. I want to say I am so thankful to be here. I'm really excited, and I know that I've been incredibly privileged in my college career to have the opportunity to really put my hand into a variety of hats. And what I've learned through that is that our community is incredibly beautiful and it's incredibly diverse. So what I'm most excited about today is speaking about those individuals in our community and those populations that oftentimes aren't discussed. So that means people who are incarcerated. That means people of color. That means low-income folks. This means reproductive rights. This means undocumented citizens. And so it's wonderful, and we've done an amazing job in our community, and we have to affirm and acknowledge that. But we also have to affirm where we can go. And so thank you for being here. Thank you that we're able to have this discussion, and I'm excited to talk about how we can get rid of the rest of our chains.
Hi, my name is Anupa Iyer. I just want to start off and say that I'm really honored to be a champion of change and to be considered an emerging leader in the disability community. But to be honest, this was not something I had ever intended because I'd spent a large part of my life trying to find ways to hide my psychiatric disability. I hid my disability because I didn't want to be treated differently by my employer, potential employers, and coworkers. I didn't want them to know that I had been institutionalized, had an eating disorder, or tried committing suicide. I was afraid of the reaction I would get. And in a way, it was valid, because one time when I asked for an accommodation at work, I was called crazy afterwards. And I knew that that wasn't right. And that's why I went to law school, to fight for the rights of people with psychiatric disabilities. 1 in 4 Americans have some form of a mental illness, yet for some reason, we don't talk about it. And that's because of the stigma that surrounds psychiatric disabilities. Stigma holds us back, and as a woman of color, I have found that we experience stigma from two sides, that from society at large, and that from within our own communities. I was shocked to learn that Asian American teenage girls have the highest rate of suicide. And stigma prevents us from accessing services, and stigma reduces the effectiveness of the laws that are designed to protect us. The way I see change is by having an open conversation about mental illness. I started speaking out about my experiences with mental illness because I want to normalize it, make it less scary and less different. And that's why I started Self Advocates Now Empowered, to encourage other Americans to come out about their disability. We can eradicate stigma by being open about our disabilities and being proud of who we are. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lydia Brown. I hate introducing myself because I'm always like, what do I say? This is horrible. This summer, I am privileged to be part of the American Association of People with Disabilities internship program. I'm actually interning at the DC Public Defender Service, which is the best public defender service in the country, according to the Attorney General anyway. I think his opinion counts. And this fall, I will be returning to the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Zoe mentioned earlier, I had been an intern there for about a year and a half, and I'll be returning there as staff. So that will be a lot of fun, and I'll enjoy being able to continue work there. My background is that I initially became involved in disability advocacy through the autistic community, and that was because I was very interested in the intersection of issues related to the criminal justice system and issues affecting the autistic community, and what happens when those collide. And since in the past 4 years, since then, I have grown to care much more about much more than about my own community, because I have learned that justice for one of us cannot be accomplished without also advocating for justice for all of us. And so, like Kaite, my focus is on an intersectional understanding of and advocacy for translational justice across our communities, across an intersectional understanding of what it means to be marginalized and to be multiply marginalized. And so I am very glad to be able to be part of this panel, to be able to represent a multitude of communities that I belong to, and to be able to learn from and share with my many wonderful colleagues who are here as well. So thank you all very much.
Wow, where to begin with all of you? It's an intimidating crowd, I must say. What we're going to do is I'm going to pose a question, since there are 8 of you, pose a question to probably 4 of you at a time. And so the first question I'm going to pose to Zoe, Andrew, Kaite, and Lydia. And that question is, what do you think has been your biggest sort of obstacle in your leadership path, and how have you worked to turn it around?
Okay, I'll take this one first. My biggest obstacle has definitely been the perception that people with disabilities aren't effective advocates for ourselves, and that we need other people to be advocating for us. Especially as someone with a developmental disability, self-advocacy is not often recognized. A lot of the time people will say, we're doing a disability thing and we have the perspectives of parents, family members of people with disabilities, we have doctors here, we have researchers here, so we've got everyone, we're all good. And then it's our job as people with disabilities to sort of put our hands up and go, I think you forgot us. No, come back. We have things to say too. So definitely my biggest challenge has been trying to promote our relevance in the things that are about us, because we get overlooked a lot. And sort of chasing after people being like, hey, you're talking about me, I want to be in on this.
Sure. I agree more with what y'all were saying. Often we face many challenges in people who themselves have attitudes about people with disabilities. For example, often we want to see the opportunities, but people tell us, no, we can't do that. Or even in supporting position, advocacy roles, describing to people about the hard of hearing and disability people and why they would need them. They say, no, we don't need that. We know what we need. And I hear that over and over again. Even sometimes the attitudes related to how important our issues are. I'm sure with everybody's disability self that they can advocate for themselves for change, to see change. And they say, oh no, later, we don't have the money right now. It's not really all that important. We have many other things to do. We don't need that. And I hear it over and over again. And we face that challenge, and we'd like to change that challenge. To be assertive and show my ability and explain my rationale in recruiting, and that is important to recruit other people to help advocate for us. But the situation still stands that, deaf and hard of hearing community, we want to go out, we want to see the whole community. And they don't understand what one community is to the other. They pity us. They excuse us on an everyday basis in the hearing world.
So I think there are two things. I definitely have to affirm what each of my colleagues said. And adding to that, I think it's individuals, and I think it's such as myself, who don't want to identify as having a disability. So I didn't really come out as disabled until college, though I missed on average 1 day a week of school from middle school to high school because I have arthritis in all my joints and had to go to the doctor. But I still didn't see myself as disabled. So I think you have individuals who are really gung-ho and excited, but then you have other individuals who have disabilities but don't identify. And because of that, it's very hard to do coalition building within your own community, but also in individuals who may need support, right? I also think the second thing is looking at just multiple identities. Like, I am a black man, and I think that very much alters how I am experienced within our own society and how people have socialized to understand what my needs are. And because of that, I think there's a bit of a lack of intersectionality when even outreaching to students are young people with disabilities. So I think those are the two biggest hindrances that I've experienced, along with just ableism and people not understanding disability beyond, well, the ADA says, so I did this. It's like, no, that's not sufficient. Like, we need dignity, we need respect, and I want to be included in our own workplace, in our society.
I think that probably one of the biggest barriers that I have faced and that I've seen affect a lot of other people is the pathologization of disability, which undercuts a lot of what you all have just said as well. So the idea that disability is pathology and therefore any characteristic associated with disability, such as moving in a way characterized by disability or communicating in a way characterized by disability, behaving or thinking or learning in any way that is associated with being disabled, is evidence of disease or deficit or disorder, and that therefore we should be pitied because of that, because we are afflicted by these tragic diseases, sarcasm, or that we are incompetent and incapable of intelligent thought or reason, or incapable of having anything to express whatsoever, let alone anything meaningful on the policy level, because obviously we can't think, sarcasm, or the entire idea that Kaite was just addressing as well in his remarks, that as disabled people, we don't grow up with a politicized identity because our history is not taught in school. I had never heard of the disability civil rights movement until I was halfway through college. I'm still in college now. I don't think I mentioned that in my introduction. Oh well. The idea that we are brought up not knowing that such a community exists. If you grow up knowing or suspecting that you might be queer, even if you grow up in an incredibly homophobic home, in a community where it's not safe to come out at all, and even if you decide that it's still not safe to come out when you're in college, you're generally aware that there is such a thing as a queer community, that there is such a thing as organizations supporting your community. When you grow up disabled, you don't know that those organizations exist. You don't know that there's a history, you don't know that there's people, you don't know that there's such a thing as a disability community, and so you don't have the choice to decide if you want to become part of that or if you want to come out, because you grow up being told that disability is just illness. It's just something that's wrong with you. It's just a medicalized thing that has to be treated and fixed, and you are taught compliance as ethics. And so if that's how you grow up, of course we're not going to be able to build coalitions, because other communities, other marginalized communities will buy into the same ableism that we'll also internalize. And so because of that, that's a barrier to being able to form a coalition, because if someone says, well, I'm not disabled, I don't want to be associated with that word because that word means incompetent or unable, well, then of course we've got a problem there. And so it is that very much that attitudinal barrier that's got to change.
The next question is for Anjali, Desiree, Zach, and Anupa. What's the best advice that you've been given by a mentor? And then what's the best advice you've turned around and given to somebody that you're mentoring?
All right. Well, I would say the best piece of advice that I received from one of my mentors, who's actually here today in this room, when I was doing some development work in Ghana, and you're just kind of in the trenches, I was working to help to develop Paralympic sport programs in Ghana. And it's one of those things where you have to remember to remove the blinders that you put on yourself, because you realize that you're actually making a difference beyond just the disability community. When you are a fire starter and when you are a champion of change, it's so easy to realize, to get overwhelmed and not realize the full potential of the change that you're instituting. So that's the best piece of advice I received. And then the flip side to that is the best piece of advice that I've given to many of the young athletes that I mentor, young individuals with disabilities and adults, is just that obstacles are just opportunities in disguise. And it's just something important to remember as you move forward in achieving whatever your dreams are.
I know when I heard this question in the back, I was trying to think of like this awesome quote, but I'm just going to be simple. And the best advice that I was given was not to lose hope. And the advice that I gave someone else was, in Long Island, we have a presentation called Spreading Hope Through Sharing Our Stories, where we go around Long Island and share our stories with young people who have disabilities, who have experience in cross systems, to, one, bring awareness that they're not alone and it's okay to be unique, and also for other people to hear the stories and see what it feels like to be in the system. So that's the advice that I give people.
I'm going to answer this question kind of in two parts, but then tie it back together. So I think professionally, the most important advice that I've been given is to learn from our history, our shared movements within the civil and human rights movements, because that informs things that we're working toward. Also, to be extremely well-read in terms of the issues that we're working on, whether it be policy-related, just to try to know, multiple sides of the argument. And then also connect the dots. How does this fit into something else that might already be doing? And then how can we bring those forces together to make something even better, leveraging resources? Personally, in terms of my own life, so I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And in terms of managing that, I was told all along the way to develop coping strategies for that, how to manage it. I run all the time. And in order to be successful professionally, I need to be able to work off like this considerable amount of high energy levels, so that we can then work with young people and show them that there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and just do what Youth Power does. And I try to pass that advice on to young people, both like the professional stuff that I said, and then also develop strategies that help you manage whatever it is that you're dealing with.
So in my case, it's not really advice. One of my mentors who's here today, it's actually an opportunity. And I think so often in our community, people with disabilities are kind of, as Lydia and Kaite have said, are written off. And as Secretary of Labor Perez said, employment is so important. And for me, employment is what keeps me going and helps me battle with my psychiatric disability. And when I came to DC, I was given the opportunity to work with some amazing people, as Commissioner Feldblum being one of them at the EEOC. And having someone like her believe in me and give me that chance to go and work for her made me believe in myself. And so I would say that having a mentor who understands you and works with you and wants you to be your best self, I think that is so important. And for people I mentor, I tell them to not give up hope, because when I was in the hospital, I was told that I would never go back to school, I would never have a job, and I would never be independent. And I proved them wrong. So anybody can do what they want.
You all have already accomplished so much in the fields that you're interested in. I'm going to ask Zoe, Andrew, Kaite, and Lydia, can you guys give us an example of an outlying project or a dream idea or something on your bucket list that you'd really like? What is your Eleanor? What is the thing that you're still waiting to get to and accomplish?
Oh my gosh, there's a whole bunch of things that I'd like to work on. I think one of them is definitely looking at how disability is covered in the press and in news media. I'm working on my thesis right now for to graduate college, and one of the things that I focus on, my thesis is on the day of mourning events that I run, and one of the things that I focus on is how when people with disabilities are killed or victimized in violent crime, how it's written about in the media. And even in articles that are supposed to be neutral, there's a tone of great sympathy for someone who would make the decision to kill a family member who is disabled. So I'm hoping to prove that empirically by using content analysis, which is a fascinating sociological thing I've just learned about doing. And yeah, and then I'd love to develop that into a bigger project, looking at how disability is represented in news media, and in journalism, and looking at how the representations of disability can be made more complex, more realistic. I feel like often stories get superimposed on us, like the stories that everyone knows, this person is disabled and we're very sad about it. This person learned to walk and it's inspiring, even if like what they'd rather be doing is like playing, I don't know, wheelchair basketball or something. So I would like to see more journalism that is focusing on how people with disabilities are actually living our lives instead of the sort of cultural memes that get put on top of us, because we don't really fit in those boxes.
Also, working with youth with disabilities often have a lot of friends that also have disabilities. And for example, with myself, there's a lot of folks that are my age that have graduated from college and have gone out into the working world. And a lot of people are finding it hard to find employment. And so I think that comes across with a lot of people looking for jobs. And so we find that with people with disabilities, it's even harder to face that discrimination in the workforce. I've seen that a lot of my friends have actually had to leave home and leave college without having jobs, not able to buy a home or a car, not able to go forward with having a family, and just young people not having a job. So here, with the National Association of the Deaf, we've really done a lot to focus on employment for people that are deaf and hard of hearing. And we're working very hard to set up centralized funding for accommodations for people with disabilities. And often that there is a responsibility on the managers to make sure that those accommodations are provided in terms of hiring and other types of access is provided. And so as we work through that, we want to make sure we're providing opportunities to reduce that discrimination through funding.
So if I had a dream project, it would probably be starting a social innovation firm to really focus on social entrepreneurship in the disability community. I think that's an area where we could really grow, and it's incredibly empowering. I would love just to have a firm that works on project management, that looks at just innovation, anything around that. And I think that's hopefully some of us can continue to develop the work that's currently being done around social entrepreneurship in our community.
I have to pick one. Okay. One of the issues that I've been particularly vocal about speaking about writing about, is the issue of certain types of abuse in the name of treatment, in the name of therapy, because if you're disabled, it's not abuse, it's therapy. And in particular, I've been writing and speaking about the use of restraint and seclusion and aversive procedures. I've written about the Keeping Students Safe Act. I've been particularly vocal and active in a lot of protests and other forms of action against the Judge Rotenberg Center, which is a facility in my home state of Massachusetts. I've been on the property, did not get arrested. It's the only place in the country that still uses painful electric shock as a punishment. At least 6 documented deaths have occurred at the facility in all of its iterations since 1971, and it's done as treatment. It's done as treatment to enforce compliance with arbitrarily defined standards of normality, and it's done simply because it's inconvenient to be around people who are disabled. It's done in direct denial of the violation of it's a direct violation of the right to be disabled. And while the JRC is certainly not the only facility in the country or the only program in which horrible torture is practiced on disabled people, many times leading to the deaths of disabled people, such as the Government Accountability Office and the National Disability Rights Network have documented in their own reports, this is something that continues to happen. And while we've made a lot of progress since the time that the ADA was passed, and we've made a lot of progress since the time of Ed Roberts, there's still a lot of work to be done. And these facilities are still open, these programs are still running, and the tactics that they use are still upheld and treated as normal and acceptable just because we're disabled. So obviously, it's treatment. That was sarcasm. Just to be clear.
Before we get to our speed round, I have one last question for a group of you guys. For Anjali, Desiree, Zach, and Anupa, I want to ask you guys, we've heard a lot of different public policy issues brought up today, both as a response to the meeting that was had with the president this morning, and just because it's ADA week, which somebody actually said to me was disability prom earlier. We've heard conversations about CRPD, we've heard conversations about Section 503 of the Rehab Act, but I want to hear from you guys. What do you think are the biggest public policy issues facing the disability community today? Because it might be different. I'm hoping it might be somewhat different than what we've been hearing so far.
For me, I think some of the biggest public policy issues that we're facing is to continue to improve inclusion for individuals with disabilities into sporting opportunities. We're starting to get there, but we're not there yet. There's a lot of education that still needs to take place so that coaches and high school staff and middle school coaches and things like that aren't afraid to include an athlete with a disability on their sport teams and are really going to be able to help to make that as more of a seamless integration. We're starting, but we still have a long way to go, and the policies are just starting now, and so we've got more work to do.
An issue that I think is really important is more places being trauma-informed. Young people are being institutionalized and they're being re-traumatized, so I think that we have to have better training in being more trauma-informed.
I think it's very important that, so you have these various entities that provide care to people with disabilities. You might have an entity that oversees foster care, that oversees juvenile justice, that oversees mental health services, and it can't be taken for granted that these entities will communicate with each other, and so I think it's very important that we, through legislative and systems advocacy, we work to change regulations so that it is possible to coordinate care so that young people and just all people in general get the support they need with the respect and dignity that they deserve.
So I have two things, one of which is going to be kind of repeating what other people have said already, but employment. don't think that we can be full citizens if we are not able to work and contribute and give back to our communities. But the other thing is, in terms of policy, is how policy is formed. I think someone else on the panel had mentioned that a lot of policy, especially here in Washington, is decided by people. And a lot of times we're not a part of that. And these are policies that affect and impact our lives. And if we're not a part of the process, and if our voices aren't being heard, then how does that help us? How is it representing us as citizens? So I think we need to be more involved, and we need to be advocates going out there and making change.
That actually leads into the first question I want to ask you guys in the speed round. Now, in the speed round, you each have a chance to answer, but we're going to keep it short and simple. As you look around the room, and I know a lot of you have talked about seeing mentors in the audience and heroes and sheroes in the audience, what's your message for them about how they need to make space at the table and create room to safe spaces to develop the next generation of leaders? And so, how do we want to start? Do you want to start? Okay.
Ask questions.
Write down the phrase, "Are people with disabilities involved in this project?" and repeat it until you get answers. And if you're the only person with a disability involved, then write down the phrase, "Why are there not more people with disabilities involved in this project?" And repeat that until someone changes what they're doing.
Just simply really being open-minded to having young people be a part of things.
Give us a chance, the opportunity to believe in ourselves.
Youth and stakeholder voice is extremely important in informing public policy. So whether your organization needs to do some sort of organizational assessment to determine where you are, do whatever you need to do to include the voices of the stakeholders.
Love, affirm, and encourage all of who we are and help us with developing our skill sets.
I echo what others have said, but also be open to new ideas and accept that social media is here to stay and try to use it.
Two things. Don't assume that youth means we don't have lived experiences or don't know what we're talking about. And involve more disabled people of color, more disabled women, more queer disabled people, and more poor disabled people. Please.
How have you been successful, or what do you think would help you be successful in getting more non-disability groups and more allies to buy into what you're trying to do?
I would say it's important to collaborate, and for me that comes about in terms of research and being able to further the needs of persons with disabilities and to show a committed action to furthering those needs over the long run.
I think we need to teach people to look for the relevance of disability issues. Sometimes someone will be talking about an issue that touches on disability and they won't realize that it does. But once you reach out to those people and educate them, in the future they can bring it back into the conversations that they're having and start to build relationships.
I think you guys answered, so I'm going to skip for me. Sorry.
I think the key is to get people to support. The key to get people to support us is that we need to get people on our team. It's hard to do it alone. So if we have allies and people behind us, I think that's what's going to give us the opportunity to succeed.
So I think of our mentoring program, the Ready to Achieve mentoring program, and the kind of like the notion of it takes a village is apropos in this situation because a whole community came together to mentor young people who have disabilities so that they could learn about careers, other opportunities, that type of stuff, and just showing that it really does take a village and connectedness to the community.
I think in terms of higher education, it's discussing ableism just as though we discuss racism, sexism, heterosexism. I think there's just a lack of knowledge around ableism and what that means. I think also just looking at intersectionality. So if we talk about prison reform, talk about the overrepresentation of persons with disabilities in the prison community. And so leveraging how disability intersects with various issues in our own conversations.
I think that it's great, first off, that this panel is so diverse. But as I see it, there's a lot of parallels with the psychiatric disability, sort of invisible disability, and the LGBTQ community. And I really want to find a way to work with them to see, I mean, they were able to get their message and get people to come out and be proud and change societal attitudes. And I want to find a way to work with them to see how we can do that for us.
Intersectionality. You cannot address issues of sexism without addressing ableism. You cannot address heterosexism and what it means to perform compulsory heteronormativity without also addressing what it means to be held to a compulsory standard of able-bodiedness as well. You just can't talk about one issue without talking about another, or you're doing all of our communities a disservice. And so when you talk about it that way with people, that's when people start to understand and start to realize that we can't be one-issue activists, and we can't be one-issue movements, we can't be one-issue organizations, because nothing's going to happen that way. We're going to operate in silos, and no one's going to be taken seriously, ever.
You guys are all really accomplished already. I already told you guys that I was totally intimidated facilitating this panel. But how can you plan, or how are you planning to maintain your momentum and to bring people along with you?
Do you want to start at the other end? Lydia, do you want to start?
Why did you just do that? What was the question again?
How can you maintain your momentum going forward, as well as bringing others along with you?
This is why I've been happy that we were going the other way.
Start in the middle. We can popcorn. Okay. I am perfectly so one, I think I'm really dedicated to mentorship. I have had some really incredible mentors in my life, and I think that has made such a difference, and I really can't, I'm shocked by how much of a difference it made in my life, but it really did. So that's one thing I'm going to be dedicated to. But also in terms of really just making spaces. And I know that may sound incredibly simple, but so often there's not a space. And so that means ensuring that, let's say I'm working at an education firm or think tank, saying, hey, how about we propose a group that we meet after work on Wednesdays, and having discussions. And so I think it's in the simple everyday manners in which we make the biggest difference.
Yes, talking to people. Now I had a chance to think for a second. Having one-on-one discussions, going to community events, so go to another community's event. Go to an event that it claims to be explicitly focused on another community's issue. Be there, talk to people, because otherwise you're never going to be able to have conversations unless you go to the places where you know people are going to be, which is not necessarily going to be where we are.
Anybody else want to take it?
So I go to a lot of meetings, and we talk about how do we keep the momentum going, and I think it's important that so this is a great dialogue today, and I think that we all need to remain in contact, but also come up with real tangible goals, benchmarks. If we really want, and obviously we really do want to accomplish many things, that we figure out a real way to do that's realistic, whether it be by setting little milestones, celebrating achievements of those milestones. Change doesn't happen overnight. So to maintain momentum, you need to just set some sort of incentive. And yeah.
Just to add to that, I think that it's important to remember that the change and whatever your cause is, it's bigger than just you. So it's important to get more people involved in what you care about. And one of the ways that I try to do that is to keep it fresh and to get involved in with new partnerships and new organizations, and to find other people to really collaborate with and who share in the same missions and causes that I do.
I agree with what we have said. It's important to set up milestones and goals that we can keep our eye on the long-term goal. It's very important to keep the momentum moving in that way, and keep the work of the people and the people that we work with, and giving the young people with disabilities, mentorship opportunities and programs such as internships and the like. And sometimes it's a lot of work, but it's certainly worth it to give them the opportunity, the same things that I have received.
Also, it's about appreciation. When we're working with young people, appreciating them for the things we do. A lot of times we get so busy, we're just asking them for things, and we forget to really just thank them. So it's also about just appreciating them, and also just showing them how cool it is to be a part of a movement and to have your voice out there. Because a lot of young people are afraid to speak up because they have been silenced once.
I actually think the more momentum you get, the easier it is to bring people along with you, because you reach a point where you need to delegate or you're going to be pulled under by everything you have to do. So yeah, when you reach that point, you just need to sort of have your eye on someone who you want to bring in and then start working together with more people.
So for me, I'm a pretty passionate person, and to keep that passion and momentum going, I need support. And what I found that's been really great with the community here is everybody has been so supportive and accommodating, and they keep you going. And I think that, and this is why I'm giving another plug to social media, is that social media also does help us reach out to other people who aren't in DC and who are in their homes and are, not knowing what to do, and we are able to reach out to them. And I also think that in terms of the work I want to do, it's getting people to be open to talking about themselves. And when I get feedback that's positive from other people, that keeps me going. And on a personal level, to keep me going, I am looking for a job, so. Had to put that plug in there.
I think most of us are.
Before we wrap this up, what can you impart to what would you think about the young leaders in the audience and the folks at home that are watching this via the webcast? If you were sitting in their shoes, what is a piece of advice that you would like to give them? And we can popcorn this, or we can do this however you guys want to Rochambeau.
Don't start with me.
Well, I'll start, and I would say believe in yourself and believe in your mission. Whatever it is that you want to set out there and do, you have the potential to do it, and we all here on this panel, we all believe in you.
Find what motivates you and learn to relate to it in a way that you can keep up for years and decades. Don't be fueled entirely by your righteous anger, because it'll burn you out real quick. I'm still struggling with that, so yeah, find a way, a pace that you can work at, that you can sustain and take care of yourself.
Something I would tell young people is to not give up, because a lot of times when I visit young people in foster care group homes, psychiatric hospitals, residentials, they just feel like because they're in that place that they'll never amount to anything. And I just want them to know that they can. I received services too, and I felt the same way, and I'm here today, and I get to be in the White House, so I want to tell them that they can do the same thing as well.
I agree with Desiree. never ever give up. I think that's the key part of it. It's something that I've told myself that I'm at a point in my life now where that sometimes you may feel that there's no other opportunities or no one's giving me a chance, but you just really can't give up. I'm sure there's others that feel the same way. You just really can't give up. Never quit, never give up.
Infuse service into your daily lives through lived experience, and then also supported by, a wide array of literature. The more connected to your community that you are, the greater your outcomes for remaining in your community will be. So make that a part of your life, to get involved with stuff, especially things that you are passionate about.
Reflect on who you are and why you're doing everything that you're doing. And I think through reflection, we all begin to grow as individuals. And I think you can leverage your own understanding about what you can do and where you're going to be going to make some change.
So 2 things. First, don't believe what other people tell you about yourself. You know who you are, and be proud. And the second thing is find a mentor. My first mentor, I picked this person because it's Jennifer Mathis from the Bazelon Center, and I wanted to do mental health law, and I researched her. I found her at a conference. I ran up to her on the way to the bathroom, and I was like, I want to know you. I want to be your friend. And that relationship is part of the reason why I'm here today. So find that person, and they'll help you.
Self-care, self-love, no apologies.
And the last question we have for you guys is, we as a community, myself and my colleagues out here, who I'm all obligating, whether or not they know it, realize we have all your personal information. I know where you live. We are dedicating ourselves to be supportive in the development of all of you as young leaders, as next generation leaders. What support, guidance, idea, resource, anything but money, do you need to get to the next stage and move your work? And we're asking you to be specific. Anupa, you want to?
Sure. Well, I already made the plug for my employment. But on a more concrete level, I find that I want to develop this organization, but I'm not quite sure what are the concrete steps I need to take to get from it's an idea and a website to it actually become something. And so I would like people in the community to help me figure out what those actual steps are and how do I go from place 1 to place 2 to where it actually can become a real organization.
So I think in developing leaders, intergenerational mentorship is definitely key. And then also remaining connected, because it's through existing networks that information can really be disseminated. If you need to talk about mobilizing people, like there's a whole group of people out there. Just, maintaining a network and a connectedness. And then also learning from, like history.
I would say for me, it's about being able to continue to further the collaboration for research. And so for me personally, a specific goal that I have in mind is to really be able to measure the psychosocial benefits for individuals with disabilities in their involvement in sport, and being able to actually measure that and to look at that, because it can only further to develop the rights for persons with disabilities in our country.
I want to learn how to do a lot of more things. I want to learn how to write regulations, marketing, messaging, how to do communications with the press, how to really use social media to spread a message. And yeah, if anyone can show me how to do those things, I will help you do them, and then I will take them back to my own work and use them there as well.
I'm a student at Georgetown University, and for about a year now, a project that I've been working on is to convince the administration to establish a disability cultural center at my school. There are currently only 3 of them in existence in the country. And I was speaking earlier about the fact that disabled people don't grow up knowing that there's such a thing as disability culture, or community, or disabled identity. And establishing centers like that at not just universities, but across the country in general, would go a long way toward getting us when we're young. So getting us before we go to college, if we go to college, and fostering more celebration and pride in being disabled. So the short-term, concrete part of that is anyone who would like to help me convince Georgetown to establish one, please do so. I know Georgetown people are watching this right now. I'm talking to you. Georgetown put this event on the front page of their website, so I know you're paying attention. I put you in the hot seat in the spotlight, so establish one.
For me, I think what we need mostly is your knowledge and your experiences and your mistakes and how you and we can make those mistakes and still get to an advocacy with the disability community. Our members need to be in a better place.
I'll just piggyback off of what Andrew said. I really feel like we need to teach young people transition, just living skills. We have a lot of young people walking around that don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to manage a checkbook. So I think it's really important to not just expect the person because they're a certain age to know something, but to really sit down with them and teach them. This is something that they will use when they're your age, and they will teach the next generation as well.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think the best way to support me is supporting other individuals, supporting other young folks and meeting them where they're at. And that doesn't mean just like once a month taking them out to lunch. That means reading their project proposal that they've written, even if it really doesn't make any sense, right? Like, we all need that feedback and we all need that support. So taking the time to truly invest, and which is with all your heart when you invest. And I think that would make all the difference.
I'm getting the, do we have questions in the audience? Does anybody want to ask our illustrious panel anything? Usually you guys never, oh, Bob Williams, thank you, Bob Williams. Bob, Claudia's coming back there with a microphone.
A lot about coming out, which for me is really about taking pride in who we are. As people with disabilities, how from you and enable more young people to come out and live proud. You talked a lot about coming out, which for me is really about taking pride in who we are as people with disabilities. How do we learn from you and enable more young people to come out and live proud?
Can I take that?
Sure, Lydia.
I had an answer that time. Like I said, one of the things that we need to do is to cultivate the sense of community identity from the time people are young. And one of the ways that we can do that is by teaching disability rights history in school. California recently became the first state ever to pass a bill that requires the teaching both of LGBTQ history and of disability history as part of the regular history curriculum from K to 12. If that became part of the national standards for curriculum, and if mentorship programs like peer mentorship programs, intergenerational mentorship programs, pairing, say, high schoolers with disabilities with elementary schoolers with disabilities, and adults and young adults with disabilities with high schoolers with disabilities, and upperclassmen college students with freshman college students with disabilities, if those types of programs existed, if disability rights history were taught in schools, if disability pride events were held publicly in more cities across the country, there's a couple of cities that hold disability pride events, a couple, compared to like the millions of cities in the country. Well, then if you grew up, you'd see disabled people being out and proud about being disabled. You'd hear about disability history in school. Sure, you might be stuck memorizing dates, but you'd be aware of it. And, as you grow older, it'd be something that's there. And then young disabled people could choose whether they want to become a part of the community or not. But currently that option is not there. So we need to teach disability history. We need to have more disability pride events in schools, and we need to have intergenerational and peer mentoring programs for young people with disabilities.
And actually, Lydia, because it was my pet project before I joined the administration, we actually have 7 states right now that have laws requiring the teaching of disability history. California is the only one that paired it with LGBT history, but there are 7 states on the books.
I've been living under a rock called finals.
Enough said.
I kind of want to add on to what Lydia said. In addition to the education piece, I also think that we can use social media to raise awareness and create a culture of inclusion. If we take the It Gets Better campaign, which made such a huge impact, and I kept thinking to myself when I'm watching this, why don't we have something like that? Why don't we have people posting videos of their lives, people with disabilities just talking about their lives? Because so often we are told we cannot, that we're unable to do X, or our doctor tells us that this is the limit of your life. Well, if we have other ordinary people or extraordinary Americans who are all coming out there and saying, I have a disability, but I also have my own life, that would inspire another generation, and I think we really need to think about that.
And I think one other thing to add is making space for invisible disabilities. I think that there's been oftentimes the typical disability narrative has been dominated by visible disabilities, and I think we really need to make space for invisible disabilities so that we can address stigma. So we cannot talk about mental health if we don't talk about the disability community not reaching out enough to individuals who identify with having psychiatric disabilities, right? And that can be said for a lot different types of invisible disabilities. So I think that's something that we as advocates in our own community really need to do.
I'm going to echo a lot of what was just said, but I also believe that disability pride, disability awareness, it needs to be infused into all aspects of the curriculum. When you talk about the mental health side of things, why isn't that being taught in health courses? Like the same as they do with like physical types of things. Talk about coping, holistic options, that type of thing. Also, make sure that people are in the most integrated and least restrictive environments, so it just, it becomes a way of life. Celebrate diversity, that type of stuff.
Also, a lot of people with disabilities are spread out all over the country. And so I think that networking with the young, it's a great opportunity to give people the opportunity to meet other people with disabilities and recognize community leaders. So reaching out to those people and give the opportunity to expose the disability culture and foster that pride.
Something I was going to add is also not awareness, I'm sorry. I was going to say discussing at work like the accommodations for young people and being open with them. Like at Youth Power, we are open to making accommodations for a young person if they, a staff if they need it. So it's really about being open and not just like the typical accommodations like a keyboard. Maybe they need to use an iPad, or maybe they need to use like a dragon speaker. Just some of those things to be open with them about.
I just want to agree with what Anupa said. I think getting online is a really effective way to foster disability pride. When I hit to college, I was really overwhelmed just with living more independently, and I went to Google and I typed in, "I'm autistic, I'm in college, what do I do?" And that's how I found the autism rights movement, and that's how I learned about the concept of disability pride. And I think even if someone is very cut off from the disability community, if they were raised not to think of themselves as disabled, if they're stuck at home in an environment where their disability is regarded as shameful, or if someone wants to lock them up in a segregated setting, there's still going to be a moment in a library or alone in their room where that person is going to want to reach out to other people like them, and often that happens online. That's where anyone who has access to the internet can make a connection with their community.
For me, I think it's about showcasing stories of people with disabilities. And there's multiple ways of doing that. Some people have talked about in our K-12 schools, and also through documentary filmmakers like Lucy Walker, who has a disability herself and who has showcased the living stories of persons with disabilities. There's power in meeting and seeing someone like you. And I think that's what our youth really need.
And I know we have another question. I see Commissioner High-Feldblum from the EEOC.
Thank you so much. First of all, Becca Coakley, Claudia Gordon, thank you so much for putting this type of panel together for us. You always, and Becca, you are a strong advocate about bringing the younger leaders here, and you have showed us exactly why that's so important. And I am going to work so hard, and my Chief of Staff, Sharon Masling, here is not going to be able to say no. I'm going to work so hard to see if we can get all of you to an EEOC hearing on employment, on disability, so that all of the commissioners can hear from you. Okay, but here's my, really, right? My question to you is, I've had a crush on Bob Williams for like forever. Forever. It's mutual, I know. I'm assuming. But Bob Williams always says you cannot be free unless you have a job and you have money and you can just do what you want. So my question to you is, yes, of course, non-discrimination in employment, and we at EEOC will continue to work hard on what we're doing. But there is an affirmative action obligation under Section 503 that Pat Chu was here, has been working so hard on, and Section 501, right, for the federal government. I'm curious from each of you, what do you think is above and beyond pure non-discrimination, which applies to everyone and every employer? I'm talking employment now. Every employer above 15 individuals can't discriminate. What would constitute something in affirmative action that is above and beyond non-discrimination that you think this government should put into place just for the federal government?
Actively seeking disabled candidates instead of just saying, oh, well, we need to fulfill this requirement to have this percentage of disabled employees. Great, let's comply with this law so we don't face sanctions. Taking an attitude of, you know what, disabled people come with a whole variety of different talents and abilities and sometimes completely new perspectives and completely different ways of going about things. And disabled people would be an asset to our workplace. Disabled people would be an asset to our agency, to our organization, to our department. And so we should actually look for and actively recruit disabled candidates for our jobs, because we want to bring in disabled people because we think they would add great diversity, great innovation, and, you know, just great work to what we're doing here. And that's an attitude that goes beyond compliance of, laws, sanctions, wonderful, to, oh, awesome, we want the best people here because we can be the best people.
Anybody?
Yeah, I would say improve the physical accessibility of federal buildings where federal employees work. No, it's true because last summer I interned at the Senate Health Committee. It was a great experience, and I had some of my fellow interns from the AAPD program who were congressional interns as well, and some of them who had physical disabilities found it really hard to navigate around Hart Dirksen on I forget which exactly buildings it was, but there's physical barriers in some of the buildings where federal employees work, and we got to make those more accessible if we really want to be welcoming to people with disabilities in our workplaces.
Oh yeah, and the attitude of inclusion doesn't stop at that we've hired you. Because then it's like, we've hired you, okay, have fun, our entrance is stairs, or have fun, all we have is fluorescent lighting, or have fun, everyone douses themselves in perfume, and we don't really care about your access needs because you're here now. Isn't that great? Because that obviously isn't an inclusive, accessible, or welcoming environment.
Also, I think that we need to be, like you said, actively recruiting people with disabilities. Often that what happens is a discrimination comes in when they're not sure if they're a strong candidate for a job. And so if you send it off and recognize, I think we need to recognize that folks do have the right needs, meet the needs of the job. And I think that's something that NAD is working hard to see, that people with disabilities are able to meet the needs of the jobs. And oftentimes that they are able to work in the office. A lot of times managers will say, well, you can work from home today, meaning that they won't have to provide the accommodations to come into the office, things like that. So I think that providing opportunities for people to be in the office with their peers is important.
That's right.
Also, I was going to say, just the word disabled. I know when a lot of young people hear it, they automatically think that they're incapable of doing something. So it's really just about maybe finding a different word or how we speak to people with that word.
I think for me, thinking about it from a human resource development perspective, I think recognizing the values that people with disabilities can bring to the workforce and really matching those values with various federal organizations and agencies. So for example, people with disabilities are natural problem solvers. And so being able to really match that skill set with an appropriate matched job, I think that would be really helpful.
Do you want to go? I just want to add a comment about language around disability, and I think something that comes up a lot is Like, do I say I am disabled or anything around that? And I think the only way that we can be truly empowering is if we're able to reclaim a word and say that this is something that is necessarily positive. Like, there's nothing wrong with all 8 of us being on this stage and saying either we are disabled or a person with disability. And I think that that's how we can go about all civil rights movements, right? Like, I would say I'm a proud Black person. That shouldn't be any different from me talking about my other identity as having a disability or being a disabled person. And so I think a lot of it really goes to how are we engaging youth in disability pride? YLF, our example is California Youth Leadership Forum for Students with Disabilities. YLF is across the nation. That oftentimes focuses a lot on empowerment of youth with disabilities and talking about leadership training and all of these things. I think we need more models such as that make it something positive to be, and not something that it's like, I did this in spite of my disability. No, that is all of who I am, and all of it was brought to the table, and that is why I'm here today.
Like the entire idea that employers often have of let's bring in people who are differently abled. I strongly object to terms like differently abled because they suggest and reinforce the idea and legitimize the idea that there is a normal able, or that that normal able or is the ideal able that everyone should strive toward. So when we say we are disabled, I don't think of that as a disempowering thing. I think of that as an empowering statement because it's placing a stake in our identity as disabled. And I don't think that we can change attitudes either from the public or from employers about the kind of people we are or the kind of things that we can do unless we place a very strong claim onto this word disabled, because that's who we are as a community.
So going back to Commissioner Feldblum's question, I think that what's really important for the federal government are 2 things. One is in the hiring process, we apply through Schedule A, and then our resumes just go through a void. So trying to figure out how to work that out would be great. But I think the other important thing is that for people with disabilities, the way getting accessible information about the hiring process and about our rights is so difficult to find, and when it's there, a lot of times it's in complex legal jargon, which I went to law school for 3 years. Even I have a hard time figuring it out. And we need to make sure that when we're putting out information, it's accessible so that people can take charge of their rights and apply for the job and know how to ask for accommodations.
Okay, our last question is going to be Jeff Rosen from the National Council on Disability.
Hi, I'm with the National Council on Disability, and we've had a historical commitment to really encourage youth and to joining our organization and becoming involved. I've gotten some great information from you all, and I'm going to go back and talk with everybody in my institution about how we can really encourage youth with disabilities to join. So my point right now is there's a rally right now in the Capitol, actually, it's on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. It's a very, very important topic for everybody here who's in the disability community. I know everyone here is there in spirit, so we're not going to give up at all. We're going to keep really pushing the Senate to ratify this. My question to the panel is, how do we integrate and involve youth in this movement? I mean, what do we do in terms of reaching out to youth about this particular piece of legislation? I mean, that's our future. I want to make sure that the youth are part of that dialogue as well. Would you have any advice for us?
Again, we got to be talking to people. We have to have those conversations at our schools, at our workplaces, with our friends, on social media. Because if we don't talk about it, people aren't going to know that it's even something that exists. People won't know that it's out there. And again, if we don't educate people, so if we don't right, this is what this means for you. This is what this means for us as a community. This is what this means for young people with disabilities. Then people are going to be like, some other piece of complicated thing going through the Senate. I don't know, don't care. That's obviously not the way to build a movement. And so you have to have those conversations both at the one-on-one level and in the sort of broader campaign way. Because if we don't have campaigns that are targeting youth organizations for disabled youth, whether that's even just small school-level clubs, or if that's larger groups like the YLF program, then students and other youth with disabilities won't be empowered with the knowledge to know that the CRPD is something that would actually affect our lives, and it's something that they should care about. Because if people don't have ownership of an issue, then they're not going to take action on it.
To add to that, I did a lot of international human rights work around people with disabilities. And in the international community, the CRPD that's it. Like, that's it. And I think here a lot of sort of younger people don't really see the relationship to international law. And I think, and how the CRPD can actually make a difference and benefit us. And so I think we need to kind of, as Lydia was saying, to educate people on how the CRPD can impact you. And I think that NCD has been doing a really great job with all your tweeting and Facebook posts, so the word is getting out there.
I would talk about deinstitutionalization because I'm not sure if the American public even knows what's happening in other countries in terms of institutions. And part of the CRPD is a mandate for community integration, right? And so this would not necessarily, but would most likely promote the inclusion and getting rid of institutions. And I think once people see what's actually happening, I mean, talking about people being chained down for 20 years in the same spot, like you just sexually, like it's egregious and it's just, it's like deplorable to even think about. And I think we need to raise awareness of like what is truly occurring and like just the lack of human dignity and just respect for human life.
During the campaign for the passage of the ADA, Justin Dart went around the entire country and stopped in every single state to talk to people. We haven't done that with the CRPD. We don't have a group of people, either a dedicated specific group of people or reaching out to our grassroots communities in each state to say, you need to be going around your state and talking to people and holding these community forums, because that garnered national support for the ADA, okay? That garnered national support for the ADA. We don't currently have people who are going out there and doing that. I mean, it's been talked about. The opposition outnumbered us in calls 50-1 on the CRPD last term. We lost those votes that we had because the opposition was better than we were at going around to their communities face-to-face to talking to people. We need to do that. We need to do the same thing that Justin Dart had done about the ADA in regard to the CRPD, because that's how we get people to know about it.
When engaging youth in public policy discussions, I think it's very important that you connect the issues back to why it matters to them and how it affects their lives. So earlier, Lydia referenced a school in Massachusetts that uses aversives on young people. It's a barbaric practice and all that. In terms of some of the work that Youth Power does to engage young people is we put out these youth-friendly policy briefs that break down all this, just like legal jargon, very, very tough words, that it's very tough for most people to digest just generally. So, and how that relates to the CRPD is creating movement, creating more education around it, and then also to the independent living stuff. I can't speak, obviously on a national level because I don't know too much about, the national movement. But, if you want to get the dialogue started for youth involvement, bring young people to the table, and whether it's through existing networks or reaching out to other people who do that type of stuff. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Also, I was going to say, making the environment youth-friendly. A lot of times we want young people to go to meetings, and the meetings are like 8 o'clock, and young people don't even want to wake up to go to school at that time. And also, giving breaks between the meetings. Sometimes meetings are an hour and a half, 2 hours. Young people need to be able to move around and feel comfortable. So just welcoming them into these meetings.
Also, I think that one of the best ways to network with youth is to work with social media. And I don't mean just put a link on a website with one-page explanation what's going on about the CRP. I mean having pictures, having short films, making an appeal towards the young viewers and the young folks that are out there. and looking to educate folks on why it's important and how it's going to impact them as individuals, or perhaps when they travel or work or whatever it is that they choose to do in their lives. We have so many people in our country that even with the ADA are struggling with things that they need to overcome.
Well, we're going to wrap up our panel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and let's show some appreciation for our champions.
All right, we do have one more, some brief remarks from our colleague here, Mr. Jonathan McBride. He works for the president and director of the Presidential Personnel Office. And so we will end with Mr. Jonathan McBride. We have heard the topic of jobs come up, looking for jobs, the need for jobs, OPM. We can talk to you about how to become more engaged with the White House through the Get Engaged program. Mr. Jonathan McBride.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I don't have a lot of time, so I will be brief, but I'm actually here to invite your help in our endeavor. The Presidential Personnel Office is responsible for the roughly 5,000 political appointees that come and go with the president, and the purpose of appointments are those are the people coming into agencies to try and affect the type of change the president has asked for to implement the policy and strategic visions that he's outlined. And if you think about the leverage of each one of those hires, if there are about 5,000 of them that we work on, and about 3,000 of them are full-time, they're managing a civil service that is 2.1 million people spread all across the country and largely outside of Washington, D.C., in your neighbors, in your neighborhoods, and in your schools, and in your communities. And so each one of those hires has a huge management responsibility, has a huge policy-based responsibility, and as a result, our office has a slogan, kind of a reason for coming to work every day, which is that people actually are policy. Each of these decisions that you make and their experience that they're going to bring to bear, and their either success or failure in the job is going to drive hundreds of policy decisions, thousands of management decisions, maybe even more than that in terms of budgetary decisions. And so each one of those hires is extremely important, and I'm here actually to ask for your help because we've got 3.5 years left. That is not a lot of time, 43 months, to try and figure out how to finish out this term. And the president has asked our office to think on 3 levels, and I'm asking you to help us with that. The first is, and they're near-term, medium-term, and long-term. The first is near-term hiring, which you've seen a lot in the press. There's been a lot of coverage. It's largely been around the cabinet and most senior-level positions. And he is pushing us very hard to deliver on a diverse cabinet and sub-cabinet and administration in the near term that reflects the diversity of the country. But he's also asked us to do more than one thing at once. And so he has also asked us to think very carefully about what about the medium term, people who we can develop inside our organization for leadership jobs in a year or 2 years, people on the outside who, if we start talking to them now, can prepare their lives to come in for those jobs as well. And then there's the question of the long term, which he's actually just as invested in, and you don't hear the news media reporting very much on, but just as in other parts of our society, there are certain agencies where historically groups have been underrepresented. And he does not accept the proposition that we should leave it that way for the next administration. And so he's asked us to look for people who are 21, 22, 23, 24 years old, who haven't decided yet what they want to be in this world, and introduce them to areas where traditionally there has been underrepresentation, so that in future administrations, they're the mid-level managers, and in maybe further in the future, they are eventually the cabinet secretaries, making it easier for future presidents to select a broader and more diverse pool of appointees. And so we're working on all of these at once, and we actually ask your help, not only if you're going to raise your hand to potentially participate yourself, but also to be a referral source for us. We have hundreds of people around the country that don't plan on serving directly by giving their 80 hours a week to the administration, sometimes more. But what they are available for is a phone call because they have a network in their community or in their sector of the economy that we can leverage to find people who would be great at these jobs, even if those people have never thought about working in them. And so there are a couple folks from my staff who are here that are going to stay around for a little bit. You can talk with them afterwards. But if any of you are interested in either potentially talking about being involved directly over the next 3 years, doesn't have to be now, we'd like to know you now, or if you're interested in being a referral source for people who can potentially come into the administration now, people we should be developing for a year from now, or people we should be introducing to jobs so that in future administrations they are the leaders, we want to hear from all of you. And this is a category where more is more. So if any of this is at all interesting to you, I would say raise your hand to our team and let them know that you can be a resource to us. This is something that the President is extremely passionate about. And I can tell you that he brings up with me and my staff constantly. So we look forward to your help. We look forward to continuing the first term, which was a great accomplishment, but he is not one to rest on his laurels. And so with your help, we think we can be even more successful in the second term. And not only send a really significant signal when people look at the people who are serving this country and this president, but candidly, making sure that when we're sitting around the table making decisions about housing policy, about the new energy economy and where money is going to be invested, all the critical issues that he's facing, that the table is representative of people all across this country. So we thank you for your help in advance. Thank you.
Wow.
I'm sure everyone is hungry and ready for lunch, also ready for some sunshine. However, this was a phenomenal 2.5 hours that we've been here, correct? So I'd like to thank you for joining us. I have to say to our panelists, what an outstanding job. You are absolutely amazing. I look forward to following your work and keeping in touch with each and every one of you. You brought so much rich discussion to us today. Your life stories were very inspiring. And for those of you in the audience, I want you to be aware that their bios, as well as their blogs, are posted on the White House website. So do take the time to take a look at those, log on to it, check them out, learn more about them. It's important, learn more about them as well as their work. So thank you. I would also like to thank Rebecca, we call her Becca. Not only did she facilitate the panel today, but she has been a tremendous help in planning this event. I could not have done it without her. Thank you. I could not have done it without my team, the National Council on Disability. They have partnered with us in this effort, so I look forward to that continued partnership and our relationship. NAD, your representation here, and the many agencies that are here, your efforts and your work really are working to advance the agenda of President Obama. And it's amazing the things that we'll be able to accomplish together. And one last word, if I can just mention, Brianna, I'm not sure if she's still here or not. Brianna.
She left a bit ago.
She's an incredible leader in our movement. Many of you all know Michael Winters. He was very instrumental in getting Section 504, or really the Rehab Act, passed some years ago, and unfortunately he is no longer with us, maybe about a week or two ago. So I was asked to inform you, maybe you're interested, that his memorial services will be taking place on Saturday. For more information, please do contact Brianna or Brana. If you need transportation, please do be in contact with me. But Michael was truly a champion in our work. He was an important advocate for our rights, and I'm sorry he wasn't with us today. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I couldn't be more thrilled with this turnout or being in this position. I look forward to working with all of you and my team of interns that are standing over here. Thank you. I have an amazing staff.
We probably won't leave here before 10 o'clock tonight. My intern, Michael, where are you, Michael? Michael, I believe he was here until who knows what time last night. The two of us have been hooked at the hip and getting quite a bit done. I'm looking forward to next week. I know this week has been quite daunting for us, but we've been an amazing team. I'm sure Michael's looking forward to next week. We've gotten a lot of support, but we've also are depending on you to be involved in this work. So thank you so much.